Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Good and Well. We were off last week because I had another engagement to speak at, but back this week with a new episode. Super excited about tonight's episode. I'm going to bring in my guest here shortly. But before we get started, I just wanted to let you know tonight we're going to be talking about ableism. We're going to be talking about autism, hiring in the workplace. We're going to be talking about a lot of things. I'm super excited for this guest. I have known Lauren, our guest, Lauren Burgess, since college. We were sorority sisters. So I'm going to bring her on. I'm going to introduce you and get ready for an exciting conversation. I can't wait to talk to her. So let me get her on in here. Questions at any time during, remember, you can always just ask below and we'll answer them as we go along in the conversation, but we're happy to answer anything. Hello, Lauren.
Hi, how's it going?
So good. How are you?
I am doing well.
That's wonderful. I'm like, I haven't seen you in person in years.
Right? Yeah, it's been a really long time. I feel like I've seen your parents before I've seen you.
Yeah, because I remember the one time I went to the coffee shop when I was in town, you were not there, but I think they've been back since. So, but because it's so close to our house in Littleton, so it's super exciting that we were able to go over there.
Yeah, totally.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining today. I'm really excited to talk to you. First of all, I wanted to congratulate you. You are like on Forbes Next 1000 list, which is incredible. Like, that's such a cool, I didn't even know that was a thing. And I was like, whoa, this is really cool.
Yeah, I think I'm still in shock. I got the news yesterday. It's definitely exciting for sure.
Yeah, well, congratulations. That's really awesome. And something that should definitely be celebrated. So congratulations on that. So we're going to talk today, super easy and super whatever, say whatever you want to say. This will be put on to our podcast after this. So we're live now. And then after tonight, this will be loaded up to the podcast so people can listen to it later on at a later time or watch it later. But today I want to talk to you a little bit about ableism. I want to talk to you about how it shows up in the workplace, how it shows up in media, because especially now, because there's a whole new thing that I was reading about as going through some new movies that have come out that have kind of addressed this too. So we're going to get into that. But first of all, I just kind of want to start with your background and give you a chance to kind of talk about yourself. So you founded the organization Garden Inc., and they provide programming for young people with autism, their families, their communities. So what sparked your interest in autism and neurodiversities in the first place?
Yeah, it really started in undergrad. I was getting my degree in psychology and I had to do an internship, and kind of the two choices provided to me at the time was at a school for kids with autism or at a preschool with typically developing kids. And so I chose the unknown. Over a decade ago, there wasn't really a whole lot out there about autism. And so I picked up this internship, and I didn't realize at the time, but it was at a school that was really helping to pioneer applied behavior analysis, which is one of the main therapies or modalities that help individuals with autism learn skills. So I really just fell in love with the work. It was by far the most challenging, or one of the most challenging jobs I've ever had, but also the most rewarding. I had a student that I was paired with at the time. His name's Patrick, and he was really impacted, had a lot of like aggressive behaviors and was nonverbal. And I had never had experienced a relationship with someone who did not talk or communicate the way that I communicate. And then by the end of the school year, we really just developed this connection that it's hard to even put words to, but we found a mutual respect for each other. We would listen to one another. He was, becoming super successful in school and things like that. And that just kind of opened up my world.
Right. Yeah. I think we, especially in college, you're kind of you're sort of in a little bit of a me set and stuff. And you don't really think about that. People don't communicate like I do. Not everybody communicates the same way I do. Not everybody is in the same space. And so to meet someone that isn't able to communicate must be a challenge, because we're so used to just, if you need something, you say something, or you can ask somebody for something, or how are you feeling even, and you can't get that. So that must be just a really you know, something really incredible to be able to overcome. I can't imagine the feeling of being like, wow, we weren't able to communicate, but now we're actually able to have like our own type of communication.
Yeah, and it just I think it's just a great reminder that like how small our world is, and how, I mean, we're going to be talking about ableism, but how ableistic even like my world has been my entire life, that I haven't been in classrooms with people who don't communicate the same way, and that my first exposure was senior year of college at a school that was specific to people with disabilities.
Yeah, that is very true. That you don't realize how much you're not, you know, in that world, and how much is catered to us as being able-bodied. You don't think about that, and even now as I see, and I'm kind of learning on the social media side of it. It's, you know, like people writing in the alternate captions, and there being a big push in that of, you know, if you're not writing those alternate captions, you're missing out on a big group of people, and you're actually showing, you know, that's being you know, you shouldn't be doing that because people aren't able to communicate, and that's not, you know, you don't want to treat people differently, and it's discrimination. That's the word I'm looking for. I'm like, here it is, there's the word. But it's discriminatory to not put up things like that. And it's even things that I haven't thought of until recently, where I was like, oh, I never really put any alternate captions or anything, but I just, you know, because I think a lot of us are like, well, I'm just going to post it up there and go. But it is about paying attention and thinking about the others that might be seeing these posts that you post, and think, well, they might not be able to see, they might not be able to, you know, experience it the same way that that others will, or people that I'm typically thinking of, and actually actively bringing that in, and to be an ally, because that's how we be an ally, you know. And I think obviously because I'm a Black woman, and that's been a lot of, for my work for Black Lives Matter, of how people can be allies for us, but I don't think about sometimes how I can be an ally for others that, and maybe it's not people that don't look like me, but people that have different abilities than me.
Right, exactly. And there's just all those intersections, right? So like being Black and being autistic, and what does that look like? And you said it, like our entire world is structured to cater towards the majority, or, you know, the privileged, and everybody else is an afterthought or a second thought, or you know, for me, I didn't even have that thought until my senior year of college, because it was just always in another classroom or in another building, or like that's for them, and you're here.
Right. There was, I mean, even I look back in elementary school, in the classes, we were all separated. Any type of disability, whatever it may be, they were all in one class, and we were all in the rest of the classes. So it didn't, you know, they didn't really take a lot of time to figure out, could these kids be integrated into classrooms? It was just like, we're not going to put them into these classrooms. And so from the beginning, it's just been set up for like not a very fair or just system for people. So could you explain just a little bit, for those who might not be familiar with autism, I know it's a broad subject, but it, like, kind of at its base, like, just explain a little bit about autism, neurodiversity, what that is.
Sure. Yeah. So autism is a spectrum disorder. And how I like to describe it is, if you've met one autistic person, you've met just one autistic person. There are like stereotypes and characteristics. I mean, in the DSM, the book that is the diagnostic material to tell somebody whether or not they have autism, has things like difficulty with social interactions, or difficulty making eye contact, has some repetitive behavior. But really it is part of this bigger category of neurodivergence or neurodiversity, and that just it's somebody whose brain is wired differently, and so they think differently, and they may act differently or do things differently than what is you know, using quotes, considered typical or normal.
Okay, yeah, and I know I kind of had found some different TikTokers randomly, like, going through, that have spoken about all of the studies that have kind of been done on younger people, and that they're not, some of them are more male focused than female focused, and how different it all looks. And it's been really eye-opening. And so I watch a lot of her videos. I'm like, wow, this is really interesting. And I'm not a TikToker really myself. I've been on like a few things, but I found TikTok to be a really actually great place for me to learn a little bit and to see different people, because like you said, they're all different. Like, it's all different, just like, you know, just like we're all different. It's the same thing. It's just you meet me, it doesn't mean you met you. And so it's been really cool to kind of learn different things. And I was like, wow, I didn't know these things, you know, that it's different sometimes in women versus men and how it presents itself.
Yes, absolutely. And it's, I mean, so many of, you know, gender norms and things like that play such a role. Boys are diagnosed like 5 times more than girls. And if you
Wow.
think about it, like boys, we think if we're thinking about stereotypical gender norms, they're supposed to be outgoing and they're supposed to be, you know, rambunctious and really talkative. And so if they're not, parents notice that and doctors notice that a lot earlier, whereas girls are supposed to be
Mm,
docile and quiet. And so if they are quiet and keep to themselves, then they're being a good girl versus maybe they
mm,
have autism. I'm glad
right.
you brought up TikTok though, because that was going to be one of the things if that I mentioned about, like, there's such a wealth of information,
Yeah.
and so there's an awesome autistic community on TikTok who are sharing their stories on a platform where it's like really easy to digest, but also
Hmm.
so open and honest and like um yeah, it's been really fun to see that platform kind of take hold of that and create a space for those voices to be heard.
Yeah, I mean, I stumbled across one of this girl's videos. I can't remember her name now. She's a blonde girl, but she was just going, she was telling her story. And I was probably 20,000 TikToks and I don't know, you know, you
Yeah.
just kind of get stuck and you're scrolling like, wow, wow. And before I know it, I'm like, oh, it's been an hour. I should probably get off TikTok. But it's been, I mean, it was something that I kind of stumbled across right before our conversation randomly, which I just thought was great to kind of, and it happened to help me out through this. And I was like, oh, this is so interesting. And so that kind of brings us into our next, because we're going to kind of talk about media. So I'm sure, I don't know how many people are watching, but on Netflix there's the show Atypical, which follows a boy with autism and his family. I really enjoyed it when I watched it, but then as I started to think back of, you know, everything with media and parenthood as well, which also had an autistic son in that show. And then when I looked back, I was like, wow, as I'm reading all these things that are coming out now about Sia's new movie called, that she has Maddie Ziegler playing an autistic child, and people are very upset about it, understandably so. And so then I was like, oh my gosh, should I have not liked Atypical? Like, because it wasn't you know, it wasn't an autistic man playing the man. And so then I got, you know, like I thought, oh, I'm learning so much. And I was like, oh my gosh, maybe I shouldn't be. So what are your thoughts about that whole thing? I mean, there's so much to unpack there, but what are kind of some of your thoughts?
Yeah, I really think you honestly hit the nail on the head. So I have a lot of thoughts on the subject too. I think one thing that I am excited about with shows that have a character who's portraying autism or has autism, it's good to just get that out there. I think in the past there's like Rain Man, where the only portrayal of autism you saw are like those savants who like
Mm-hmm.
really impacted socially, but then like brilliant in math or piano or something
Right.
like that. I like that media is now moving closer to what may be more like real life, but we can still do better. I mean, a lot
Mm-hmm.
of those shows, those characters are still playing into those very stereotypical things that people
Right.
think about when they think about with autism. And then also they're played by neurotypical people when
Mm-hmm.
we could be doing better. We could be actually paying and employing people who have those lived
Right.
experiences to play those roles. But I think we're doing better. I think we could be doing better. I love shows like I have a hard time watching a lot of those shows just because I
Mm-hmm.
nitpick it naturally.
Right.
Um, a show that I did love though was Love on the Spectrum. Have
Yeah,
you seen
I
that?
heard that one. I heard that one was great. I still haven't seen it, but I've heard it so many good things about it. So I'm like, I need to watch it, but I hadn't watched it yet.
Yeah, I mean, there's some little things here and there, but honestly, I felt it gave a really good representation of um, just the very typical struggles that we all have. Like, what does dating look like?
Mm-hmm.
What do apps look like? What does going on a first date look like? Who pays and all of that, and kind of what goes behind the scenes and what support is needed, and
Right.
what that looks like for people who really do have autism.
Yeah, that's, I don't even know how that looks. And, so for myself, so it's great to see other people navigating experiences and real life experiences, because we don't think about that so much. And like I said, I did watch Atypical, and I was like, oh my gosh, like, I'm really glad that they're showing, for me in my head, it's like, oh, that we're trying to show different stories. So it's exciting, but then you do realize, oh, this is, still not quite hitting the mark. And I know, if anybody knows the drama that's kind of going on with the Sia movie that came out, people, had said, a lot of people had given her a hard time for it and said, we would like to see someone in this role that has autism. And then she was like, well, we auditioned people, and then someone was like, well, I auditioned for, was like, well, obviously people aren't good enough. Just like, it was very dramatic, and a lot of things. I was like, wow, this is crazy. And I read kind of a thread of someone who was explaining how, how that felt, and how, just kind of the dismissal of that community, and feeling just like, you're trying to tell the story, but then you're not even using people who can tell the story to tell the story. And that's, and I think anybody in any situation would not want that. But we still have a hard time like doing that for disabled people. It's like, oh, you're not going to have a white person tell a black person's story, like, you're not having them dress up as a black person. That's obviously a very big no. But it's not the same when it's when you're talking about neurotypical versus not. It's not like, oh, well, we can do the same thing. Like, this is kind of not right to do it.
Right. And then, taking it a step further in that, okay, so she did this, she made these choices, they were poor choices, but it's said and done. But now the community is coming and saying like, hey, you did this wrong, but still not being in a place of like listening and hearing, and like making excuses. I mean, you can audition, but if you're going to do it right, you're going to need to audition and put a lot more time and resources behind making sure you get the right people in the room, because there's so many, systematic barriers that prohibit even somebody with a disability getting into the door of the audition. So yeah, that's unfortunate, but I think it's a good learning experience for everybody.
Yeah, I hope so. Part of me is like, where's like all the outrage? I feel like it's very small. I have only seen a couple things. I'm like, this is really awful, but I do think that Atypical did have some of the friends of the main character. I think they actually, they had autism. I think some of them did, because I think I read about it. So I was like, I'm curious to know, like, did they hire anybody with a background, or was it just all, actors? And so like you said, I think it's great to see those stories on screen, but also there's just so much more that can still be done. So hopefully we'll just keep moving in the right direction, because I know I would love to see more portrayals that, that it's fair to everybody, that it's an accurate depiction, because no one can tell your story like someone who's truly lived it. So I really hope we work that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of my favorite quotes, I try to live by Maya Angelou, but when you know better, do better. Right. And I feel like, there's so many platforms now where we can actually listen to people who have these lived experiences and get direct input, that really any excuses not to have that input at like bare minimum, it's not super valid.
Right. Yeah. So I want to talk about your coffee shop, because I'm getting I'm better into coffee. I'm trying to like now like froth and do all these fun things. I'm trying to get fancy. But so I'm very into coffee. But so Dirt is the coffee shop that you have founded, and it employs autistic individuals. And I'm curious about the impact that you've seen, not only in the employees, but also in the community.
Yeah, Brett, I love that question, because so Dirt's mission is really twofold. One, we want to employ and empower individuals with autism and other disabilities. And then also the second piece is help the community get to a place where they're comfortable and have, the opportunity to have daily interactions with people who are different than them. And so, I mean, Our program, so we have 30% of our permanent staff identifies with being disabled. And then on top of that, we have an internship program where we bring in between 5 and 15, depending on the season and the cohort, individuals who identify as being disabled and have had no job experience before. And so this is their first paid work experience. We pay them, and then they get to work on our bar, and then they get paired with a job coach to learn the skills that they need. And so that's really great. They gain confidence, they gain those basic skills, and then we're kind of, we're building a foundation for them to kind of set them up on a path for their next steps. We're not trying to train a bunch of people how to work in a coffee shop.
Right.
Yeah, we're building those resumes and building that experience, but then also what the big picture goal is that we're redefining for our customers things like what a traditional customer service interaction can look like and should look like. And honestly, how ableistic is good customer service. You're expecting speed, you're expecting eye contact, you're expecting a smile, you're expecting someone who can, is totally able-bodied and doesn't have any stims or tics and things like that. So we're asking the community through something like coffee to kind of meet people where they're at, and meet people who you might not have the opportunity to see every day, but they're out there and we're here and they exist. And let's give you a cup of coffee in the meantime.
Yeah, that's incredible. I think that I love what you said about, changing what we think about customer service, because there is just such an expectation of, oh, they didn't do this, they weren't fast enough, they didn't do this. And there's all these expectations of that but you don't really know what's going on with your waiter or waitress or whatever else is, whoever else you come into contact with in customer service. And that there's grace required there, because you do need to understand. And I think that's so important to help people to understand that not everybody is the same. Not everybody is comfortable with eye contact. There's a lot of other things that, that prevent people from providing that top tier customer service. But I also think that there are not a lot of opportunities for people, because in hiring situations, I feel like people are like, oh, well, this isn't going to work because they don't do X, Y, Z, which is also so unfair, because it doesn't mean they're not a good employee. It just means they don't function, or they don't have the same experience with contact and connection as we do. And that doesn't mean anything,
Oh my gosh, 100%. I mean, the idea for Dirt happened because one of my clients at Garden, what he had graduated high school, was not sure what his next steps were, and thought the good next step for him was to get a job, and trusted me to be his job coach. And the number of interviews he went on and just got the door slammed in his face time after time again, because he didn't have the people skills. But I was sitting there knowing exactly what the job entails and thinking, like, he's going to be your best employee you've ever had.
Right.
And the longest employee you've ever had, the most loyal employee you've ever had. But because he doesn't have these like interpersonal skills that meet XYZ standard, and that are like very, ableistic and all of those things in there, that nobody even gets the chance to showcase what they're truly capable of.
Right. And it's crazy, because it's just a type of discrimination that kind of gets okayed. I mean, there's lots of discrimination that is kind of just okay, because it can't be proven. I think, you can't prove that, oh, well, we didn't want you because of this, but it's like, the truth and why. But it's just so hard, because it's that workplace discrimination that you can't really prove. And so you're just kind of like, well, like, what to do now?
Yeah, it's that it's, do they fit our culture? And or will they check all of these boxes, versus looking at okay, let's see how we can maybe restructure what this job looks like and play into their strengths, and then give the customer service piece to someone else, or things like that. It's so like cookie cutter. And I it gets okayed. The discrimination gets okayed.
Yeah. I mean, we definitely need to rethink, and especially now that everything's moving, a lot of things are moving online. I think that's so great, and maybe like greater opportunities for people to have experiences in the workforce if they're able to, you know, operate on the computers, and because there is a lot less of that like eye to eye contact and things like that. But I just think that we so much need to, as a culture, look at the different ways of living, because we are so, everything is so geared towards able-bodied individuals, and that's really just it. And so this has been something that, as I, you know, I was super excited to reconnect with him. I was like, oh my gosh, I actually really want to talk about this and kind of learn, because I think even for me, I'm like, what can I say? What can't I say? What, you know, am I saying something wrong? And there's that, and but I have to remind myself it's the same thing as, you know, with Black Lives Matter. I'm like, just say the thing, and if it's wrong, you will be corrected, and if it's right, like, it's fine. But it's that, you know, you don't, because it's something I don't have experience with. It's a discrimination that I don't have experience with. I'm like, oh, is it like, can I say disabled? Can I say, like, I don't know what to say, or how to address it. So even I can tell myself here, even in our conversation, I'm like, oh, is that like, can I say that? Is that right? Am I saying it the wrong way? So I think there's still so much to be learned. And this is a space for me, especially, that is, you know, a little, new for me, because I'm like, well, I don't know a lot about it, and I don't know how to approach it the right way. So I'm trying to think of it in the same sense of, you know, Black Lives Matter, and how can I be an ally, and how would I want someone else to show up for my cause, you know, or and see how I can be of help there. But it is something still so new to me.
Yeah, I think it's new to so many people too, and I love that you're creating this space to even have this conversation. And, you know, I'm in the field every single day. I've built a career out of it, but at the end of the day, I'm still an able-bodied person talking about this community that I don't have a lived experience. I mean, I do consider myself neurodiverse. I have ADHD, but in no way is my lived experience anything close to what somebody who has autism has experienced. But I think, you know, silence is violence, right? And action,
Yeah.
you know, making mistakes along the way is better than freezing and not being brave. So I think just continuing to create spaces like this. And then also, I mean, I'm constantly learning too. When even a few years ago, it was, the whole field was person first language, you know, it's person with autism. And then the community, people with autism are saying, no, we actually, autism is part of us. We like to be called autistic. And no, we're not a puzzle piece. We're not meant to be figured out.
Right.
Like, nobody's trying to like break you apart and figure you out and like fill these holes and things like that. It's constantly, we're constantly learning and growing. And I think as long as we're moving closer to including and creating spaces and actually listening to the people with lived experiences, then that's the best we can do. Right.
Yeah, and that's what I'm, yeah. So, and that's why I, you know, I was so excited to talk to you, because I'm like, oh, I actually haven't really, you know, as I've gone through, as I've been learning or watching through Instagram and things like that, of people, you know, as I was saying, like doing their auto generated or their alternate context, and also auto generating captions and things like that. I'm like, oh, this is something that I really should be looking into, that I haven't been looking into like I need to, because I think we just all make the assumption that everybody's consuming things the way that we're consuming things. Like, you see me, I see you, you know, it's we're not thinking about everybody else's experience, and not because we don't care. Sometimes it's just that, I mean, we're in a very individualistic society, unfortunately, and you have to do the work, and you have to actively be like, how can I find somebody else's experiences? Who can I find to listen to? How can I make this more of a part of my day, and actually actively involve yourself in these things. And so that's, you know, something that I was so excited when, you know, when you had reached out to me, kind of when you had made me that picture on Facebook. I was like, oh my gosh, I should talk to Lauren, you know, like it just kind of clicked to me. I'm like, what a perfect, it was just, you know, for me, it was just a divine timing of like, oh my gosh, I'm doing this thing, and this would be a great person to talk to, because I am just really trying to learn.
Yeah, I love that. You had said something and then it slipped my mind. It'll come
Yeah,
to
when
me.
it pops up, just throw it out there.
Yeah, it'll come to me.
I did have a question because, and I know it's not one of the questions that I sent you, but it was one that I had on my list, and I was like, I don't know how it fits the whole thing. But since you kind of had said during the conversation about coffee about stimming, and so I kind of one of the things that I got into as I was going through all my research and reading people's TikToks and all of these things, it was about stimming and about how they were coping mechanisms, and I'll have you kind of explain that in a second, but. And people were saying, like the world would be better if more people would actually do these things and it wasn't seen as childish. So if you could explain what stimming is to people, because I really just thought that was I mean, it's not exactly on our topic, but I just thought that was so interesting. And especially with COVID and high anxiety and just like the extreme stress that everybody's under, I just really kind of pulled in. I was like, wow, that sounds like a great coping mechanism.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what it is. So stimming is a coping mechanism. A lot of times what it looks like is a repetitive behavior, and it can be physical or it can be verbal. And so like the stereotypical stimming is like flapping. A lot of kids with autism will like flap. But it's totally, it's meant to self-soothe, and we actually all do stim in one way or another. I mean, it could be like tapping your foot when you're in the lecture, or, clicking your pencil, or, biting your nails, things like that. It's all just things that we do to kind of self-soothe. I've had friends who self-soothe and stim by just like pacing back and forth, or talking to themselves and like saying the same like part of a song over and over and things like that. When I'm training new therapists to kind of work in this field, a lot of times people feel uncomfortable with stimming just because it's this like new behavior that might look odd, and their inclination is to like stop it or correct it. And I've heard people with autism describe stimming like it feels like a sneeze that you just have to get out. And like, could you imagine if somebody came up to you or like expected you to like hold in a sneeze and not sneeze? You'd feel like you're gonna like burst on the inside.
Right.
And so there's different, if there's a stimming behavior that like negatively impacts someone's capabilities of like successfully living and things like that, but most are so totally harmless and okay, and absolutely do need to be normalized in society.
Yeah, I mean, I was reading about that, and it's like it was saying that that neurotypical is like, oh, you guys turn, you might turn to drugs or alcohol or something else as a coping mechanism, and this is harmless. It doesn't hurt anybody. It's and that it's seen, because I know I read about the girl was talking about like a chewing necklace that she chews on and stuff like that, but that how it's seen as being childish, which she's like, but if people maybe like if people had those, they might be better coping, they might be better people. And I just thought that was so interesting. And even as you explained it, that we all kind of have it, that either we're maybe like tapping, and I do that all the time, or I'm always like, I have like always something in my hands, or even on conversations, or like a pen, or I just like when I have tough conversations, especially when conversations are challenging for me, I usually am like playing with something in my hands, and people are like, what are you doing? I'm like, nothing. It just makes me feel better. It just makes me like, and I don't even realize that I'm doing it. I'll pick up something that's close by and I'll be, just kind of playing with it in my hands. And so, when you said that, like a lot of us have it and we don't even realize it too. Like that clicked in my head. I'm like, oh my gosh, I do that. When I have a conversation that it feels a little bit uncomfortable for me, I always have to have something in my hands that, that makes me feel a little bit better. Like that I'm present. I mean, I'm like present, but I'm like, I can be here too.
Yeah. It helps you be present, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my not one of my favorite things, but a fun thing that I do in like really boring meetings is point out all the neurotypicals and try to see what their behavior is, like how they're coping with the meeting and what they're doing to cope with the meeting. It's pretty fun.
Yeah, that is just something to be like more cognizant of. But as I was reading about stimming, and I didn't really know, because I was reading how people were like, oh, they were talking about in the movie, again, Sia's movie, about the stimming and the problem with the portrayal of that and everything like that, how it was very like a big stereotype. It was nothing that, it was just like over the top and all of that, which I don't intend to watch the movie. And, you know, a lot of people are like, don't watch this movie. And someone with autism watched it. Was like, I watched it so you don't have to. These are the things that I took away from it. So I was just reading their kind of breakdown of it. I think on the Conscious Kid Instagram account, if anybody's interested about it, I'll post it up later too. But it was just kind of their thoughts on what the experience was and what it was like watching. But I was like, what's stimming? And then I looked it up and I was like, well, and then I got kind of further into it when they were like, you know, everybody should have these coping mechanisms, and there shouldn't be such a stigma around them of like, oh, they look childish or whatever, that as long as you're not hurting anybody really. And none of, you know, they don't.
Yeah, absolutely. That's also, I feel like you touched on a point that we also try really hard to incorporate at DIR, and then any other company that wants to employ or start looking at employing people with disabilities or neurodiversities is, you know, all the tools that we put in place at DIR to help our neurodivergent coworkers succeed. They help everyone succeed, whether or not you have autism. So whether it be like a visual schedule or a written schedule, or like more breaks or less breaks, or just a modified work schedule or a modified work time, things like all of those things are second nature to us as job coaches, working and trying to remove barriers in places like employment settings, but every single person benefits from it.
Right. Yeah. There's so many scheduling things. I think that, I mean, because we're all this like 9 to 5. I mean, and not a lot of people function well from that, I think. And I mean, I know I don't, and that's why I don't have a typical 9 to 5, because it's not something that I enjoy or function well with. But I think it's very interesting, especially that this pandemic has kind of brought about that not a lot of us function well in the typical, like what we've been doing of like 5 days a week, 2 days off. And the way it's been. And so looking at other ways to run business, other ways too that are, you know, built off of schedules that are created because you were able to see that it works differently with different types of individuals. I think that's a cool thing to look at as well, because I think one of the things that I've noticed the most, people are like, oh, I don't enjoy working the way that I was, or the schedule that I was. And now that I have a little bit more freedom, or I feel better, even if we are all in the middle of a panic and a pandemic, it's still like the work part is not as awful as like they were feeling before with the 9 to 5.
I agree. And something that I think is really, I think we're seeing come out of this time in the pandemic, where people are having to figure out, one, how to keep their doors open. They're having to be really creative. And then also everybody's working from home and trying to relearn what it means to work. And really, I think we're moving into a space where employers and employees have to be a lot more creative and flexible and go and think outside of the box. And that's where, you know, people with neurodiversities thrive. They thrive outside of the box. This world is so built for like the privileged, white, able-bodied, you know, cisgender, all of those things, male. But the world is neurodiverse. And the more we can build in that creativity and that flexibility, the better we'll be.
Yeah, I like that. So what do you think is just the biggest stigma around hiring individuals with disabilities? What do you think kind of is that thing that just makes employers just not be so receptive to it?
Yeah, I think there's still so much, I think we still have such a long way to go in helping the general public just understand what it means to be a human with autism or with a disability in a work setting. Even now, some of the employers that I talk to that are like, all right, we're ready to do this, let's do it. They're still wanting to like plug people in this very like cookie cutter thing in the back of the warehouse, and like sorting you know, the same thing over and over and over. And yeah, sure, some people maybe with autism would excel in an environment like that, but it's so individualistic, and it's not, you really have to look at the person first, and not think like, oh, I have a job that's perfect for an autistic person, because that's not going to be true. Something that I help employers do is anytime somebody has like a job opening or a task that is just like not being done or not being done the right way, or it's like falling to the wayside, that's really where I like to plug somebody with autism in, because what I have found is that they're excellent problem solvers, and they tend to like the jobs that neurotypicals get bored with. For example, one of our coffee shop managers, he was hired on as a coffee shop manager, and we had two other coffee shop managers, and we were just setting up our menu and our processes and our stocking and all of that, and he came in and he was like, what the heck are you doing? And rework the entire system. It's way more efficient. It's way more streamlined. And like, he has it dialed in. So I feel like it's where I like to work is like, look at kind of the soft spots or the sore spots, and then think about who we can plug into that would really bring that to life. And really, it's just about playing into people's strengths.
Right.
And then making things accessible. I mean, it can be just as easy as making sure your postings are accessible to everybody, and that you're not just posting on like Indeed, but you're partnering with schools or things that are getting this information out into the community. And yes, it's more time, more effort, more resources, but you're going to start attracting talent that will help you overcome things that you didn't even probably know you were missing.
Right. Yeah. And I think, I mean, like I said, even with saying the piece about, doing the auto-generated captions and things like that on Instagram, it's like, it does take more time, but you have to think about, are you willing to take the time for other people to be able to view what you have and to make it more, make it less discriminatory and all of those things, and make it right for everybody. And so that's something that I think that a lot of things that are right and we should be doing take more time. And we live in a place, we live in a culture of like, how fast can I get it done? We're like in this McDonald's culture. It's like, I need to get it done now. I need to do it like actually yesterday. It needed to be done 2 weeks ago, even though I just learned about it today. Like, we're just in that, like, it needs to be done, and really just taking the time that we need to take to make sure things are accessible for people. And even though it takes a little bit longer, that the outcome is so much better if we just take the time to be accessible to everybody else.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the statistic is 30% of the world's population has a disability. And then as you age, most of us towards the end of our life, we're going to be impacted by disability. Whether you're, an influencer or a small business or a big business, you are completely missing out on a huge part of the population just by choosing not to take the extra 30 seconds that it takes to write that alt text.
Yeah. Yeah, it's something that I'm trying to get better at. I did it like one time and I was like, oh, and then I like never followed through again. And I'm like, I need to do that because I read a thing about it again. I'm like, I need to be so much better about them. Like, but what do I describe? What do I, and it's like, just do it once again. If it's wrong, it's wrong. You did it anyways, like do it wrong. And then you'll figure it out along the way, but like try, because the most you can do, or the least you can do, is not try. And we don't want to, not try. Which kind of brings me to my next and final question of just some ideas or some places that you have that we can look to be better allies. Maybe some resources that you suggest. I don't know if you know of any books specifically, or I know we talked about TikTok a little bit, but any resources that you might want to share with us to become better allies.
Yeah, for sure. I think honestly, the easiest place to start is either TikTok or Facebook. There's such a great community and representation on both of those platforms, and probably even Twitter too, but you're not going to get as much information. And really making sure that the groups that you're looking at or the TikToks that you're looking at are actual people with autism and not people speaking on behalf of people with autism. I say that as I'm doing it now, but I'm always working to be a better ally too. And making sure you're listening to the voices and the stories of people with autism, and whether you're reading books too. I mean, Temple Grandin is like a super famous person with autism. I would say that she's She has some great advice and shares some great experiences. But I think where you meet like the real people and not the savants, but like the bulk of the spectrum is on Facebook and TikTok.
That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, like I said, I got onto one thing and I was like, oh, and I'm learning so much. And I was like, this, and I was there for hours because you just get sucked in. But I was like, this is so interesting. And just seeing how, she experiences the world and I can't remember her name. I wish I could, but she just kind of talks about like facial expressions and mirroring facial and having to learn to mirror facial expressions so that she feels more normal, but how abnormal it feels for her to do that because she's just trying to mirror somebody else's reaction. And it's just things that I don't think about on a daily basis that I'm like, wow, this is such an interesting way to look at life, or just such a different experience than what I live every day. So seeing her, and she'll go through kind of her daily routines, and she goes through her entire schedule of, what needs to be done at what time. And it's like, well, that didn't happen. And how it kind of like throws her off, but then she's like back on. And it was so eye-opening to me. And I was like, wow, this is really interesting to see someone else live. And I mean, I think we should do that with so many things, not just people with autism, but so many different things, is, that kind of walk a mile in someone else's shoes, which is so cool that we're kind of able to do that a little bit through like social media, and that now we can kind of actually walk a mile in other people's shoes, and it's very eye-opening.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's incredible to think, and I think it'll just give us all more grace just being like humans, and just understanding how much we as a society are expecting people who are different than us to mask and mirror us. And think about the times that we have to do that just as like professionals, like even being on here, like I'm at a much higher energy than I typically am at this time, things like that.
Right.
I'm going to be more exhausted after this. And just think about like having to live your entire life and trying to always meet those expectations that society puts on you, and just how exhausting that is, and how liberating it could be and would be to finally create a space and a community that people don't have to do that.
Right. Like the way that was so interesting that you said that, because being a fitness coach, when you're coaching, you're like, yeah, oh my gosh, it's like 5 a.m. I'm like, there's no way I'm like this at 5 a.m. and it is so exhausting. And you putting it that way of like, think about how exhausted that you feel, like, or how exhausted you were going to feel after having like a conversation, high energy conversation. And I'm like, wow, like I kind of get it. If I had to do that all the time, it would be so exhausting to try to be this person that I am somewhere in there, but like, I'm not this, chipper person at 5 a.m. as much as I want to be. I'm not that nice. So catch me at 5 a.m. when I'm not working. It's not going to be so pretty. But I just really, that you putting that into that perspective really, like, for me, I don't know if anybody else listening, but for me, it was like, oh, wow. Like, that is a lot. That is really exhausting. Because I think about how tired I am when I get home. I'm like, I just talked to her a couple hours. Like, I didn't do that much, but I'm like ready to do nothing for the rest of the day. And having to do that constantly all day seems like almost undoable.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's why things like that 9 to 5 Monday through Friday work schedule is so archaic, and it's not set up for anybody who really can't cope with masking all day, every single day. I mean, their burnout is already through the roof for so many people who are just working right now, who aren't impacted by autism or anything else. And like, yeah.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm really so glad that we connected again, and that I was able to have you on here, because I was like, this is the perfect conversation. Like, I just can't wait to talk to you, because I've been trying to learn so much. But if you want to give everybody kind of where they can find you, if, either the garden or dirt or your own personal, wherever you want to share, and I'll share it also after this, and it'll be in the captions of it. But if you want to just share where everybody can find you.
Yeah, sure. All of us are on Instagram and Facebook, and then our website is dirtcoffee.org, and then gardenautism.org.
Awesome. So thank you so much. I will tag the Instagram accounts for both Dirt and for Garden on the caption here. This conversation will be up on IGTV for the end of time. And then also it will be later on tonight. I'll strip the audio, get it up onto the podcast. You can listen anywhere. If you missed any of the conversation, I do encourage you to go back because it was a very good conversation. Lauren shared so much information with us, and I learned a lot, I know personally. So I hope other people were able to take some information away from this, that we can go out and make the world a little bit better for everybody, not just people that are just like us, but everybody else that, you know, that may not be like us, and maybe go make a friend that's not like you today. I think today's Random Acts of Kindness Day. So there's still a little time to go be kind to someone else, whoever it may be. But thank you so much. And congratulations again on your Forbes honor. That's so incredible.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me and your wonderful questions. It's so nice to talk about things, even beyond coffee a little bit. Yeah. I really appreciate you. And it was so good seeing you.
Yes, you too. And the next time I'm in Colorado, post-COVID, all of those things, I'll come in and I'll come in when you're actually at the coffee spot, or we'll actually hang out.
Yes. We'll love
all right.
it.
Thanks so much, Lauren.
Thanks for it. Bye.
Bye.